Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Relationship Essentials. We're excited to bring you another great topic. And again, all our conversation is about pushing Kingdom's way of doing relationship. Our conversation is to encourage believers to do relationship the way God designed for relationship to be done. And to kind of challenge the unbeliever to begin to think, is my way really working? Or should I just surrender and do it God's way? You know, we believe that if you put God's word to the test, it will always come out true every single time. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the channel, Relationship Essential on YouTube. If you're listening to this on any other platform, just follow us, leave us a comment. If you're on Instagram, follow us on Instagram, repost our reel, the same way we repost funny and useless things all the time. Let us repost and push Kingdom stuff. And if you ever want to know how you can support the brand, we do a lot of free events, but the way you could support is you could buy the merch, right? You could buy a t-shirt, you could buy a hat, you could buy a hoodie, you could buy the pants. You could just support in any way. You could just give us $10,000, however God leads you, all right? But I'm really excited about this topic today because I think it affects more people than we realize. And today's topic is beauty standards and how it affects God's children, right? And I couldn't think of anyone better to have this conversation with than my good friend here, Marie. All right, you guys see that, all right? Get it there, but she's just awesome. I heard her I met her last year at Worship United, and she made me want to learn Spanish, even though I haven't done nothing about it since Worship United. I haven't practiced. All I can remember is manifestera, right? There you go. I remember that part. But she I literally remember her singing. I'm like, man, like all that power is coming from that small person right there. And it's crazy how much anointing and power she has. And she literally lives her life writing music to inspire God's people to live God's way. So there couldn't be anyone better to have this conversation. How you feeling, Mary?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So tell us a little bit about your music before we get into the conversation.
Yes, so I've been doing music, like putting music out. I've been doing music since I was 9. I actually told them earlier, it was a funny story because I wasn't told that I was going to be a singer at a very young age. They used to tell me, just give it up. Like, give it up. You're probably going to be a pastor like your father. You're probably going to play the drums. Just don't sing because you can't do it. And then,
so there's hope for me.
Yeah. I had to rewind what you said. There's hope. We're going to leave it there. So later on, I found a desire to want to perfect that area and really give it to God because at the end of the day, there's nothing my God cannot do. Okay. Come on. That means there's hope for you.
There's nothing my God cannot do.
Oh. There we go. There you go.
Okay, that was good. I did that good, right? What note was that I hit?
You held it down. You held it down. Right. Cool. You could probably be like a background. Hold the melody.
I don't mind starting from the back.
There you go.
Walk my way to the front.
There you go. You see? But yeah, so then later on, at a very young age, I started writing. I had a desire to just write, and I had to really make a decision, a stance that I was going to take, a standard that I was going to keep according to what I wanted to represent, who I wanted to represent, because that was going to be the longevity of what I'm doing. And not just that, there's going to be a security around it where I can actually stand on it and know, all right, but it might actually prosper because of who I'm doing it with. So I just added that in there. But years later, I end up doing my first single I did 2 years ago now. And I really, truly, it sounds cliche to say, it's like, oh, God's the one who's taking track of the numbers and stuff like that. But since then, I've had over 1 million streams on all platforms. And for real, come on. And I have to say, because even in my marketing, doing all these things, I know that the hand that is really in there is truly the one who has full control. And in this process, I'm not even going to hold you. It's a very hard process of really giving that trust up, and the challenges that get presented within these just 2 years within the industry have pushed me in ways that I never even thought possible. But yeah, so my music, you can find me as Mighty Love on all social media platforms and on all streaming platforms. But yeah, I could go there forever because Lord knows I done went through it with this.
No, that is beautiful. And I think when I listened to your music, I asked you if you ever felt like the pressure to sing, because sometimes you want to sing what people want to hear, right, or what is trending, so how do you stay in path? Even, I'm not sure, when you first released your music, did you have the success you anticipated? Has it been what you like? How have you kept on track? And not, because a lot of the people out there in the world, like, you often hear they started in the church. Right. Like, I always hear that, oh, this person started in the church, right, that person started in the church. And sometimes because they wanted to sing what their agent or what their manager or what culture told them, hey, this is what's gonna pop, maybe you should sing that. How do you keep focused on what your calling is? Yeah,
to keep my standard is what that is, because it's a very, very challenging situation when it comes to what you're doing it, who you're doing it for, because I've seen all sorts of things where there are artists, and I'm not going to name any names, but we see it, there are artists who they present and they represent God, and I say this on purpose. They give out 100%, and so people then receive it, and they're receiving 5%, so that they get the results that you get. Now, it's a separation between God still being able, God will use a rock to share his word, So I think you asked that first part is, God supersede the numbers that I had ever expected in the very beginning. But keeping my standard with the presentation that has been given to me, like, just to give an example, in the very beginning when I first started, even before I even wrote my first song, I had someone who had offered me a contract, right? And they were doing it. They weren't necessarily doing it for God, but they said, we can work with it, I'm like, okay. But I thought about it. They said, this is the amount that you're going to get. This is what it's going to look like. This is how we're going to promote you. And so I had to really sit down with God and take that moment, not just as the opportunity, because that's what everybody likes. They want to, there's the green light's there. All right, let's go. Let's just do it, right? And so it's having to really sit back and think about what decision you're about to make. And so I'm big on analogies. So I imagine it like this, where you have a big building with everything that you could have ever desired, the money, right? What is a lot of people's version of success, right? And then you have everything that they could have ever desired, and their foundation wasn't solid. So at the end of the day, everything that you built up with all those years, all that time, it doesn't matter how long, it then falls apart at the end of it. So I think that's something that stayed with me, where God is like, okay, understand this as a truth, not just as something that sounds good, because that's what happens within the industry, is what sounds good. I feel like, and you could correct me if you feel otherwise, but I feel like within the Christian industry, music wise, you're dealing with a lot more what's the word I want to use? I'll say like snake-like intentions than you see in the secular, because their intentions for what they want and what they desire are hidden behind something that looks really good. So your discernment has to be on point, and not just necessarily because you're going to make mistakes. And that's where I think as well God aligns you, but to really see and take that time to pray and have people who you surround yourself with that would also see and call out for what it is, and not just see what you see and say, oh, that looks good. Oh, God, let's do it. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's really taking that time and checking my accountability on people, and also what I want to keep as my principles moving forward, because this is only the beginning. And I've seen a lot of stuff. So I'm like, my principles are going to be a priority in my moving forward.
All right. That is beautiful. And I hope it serves as an encouragement Absolutely. To everybody, because God has given, like I always say, God has impregnated us with a vision, a dream, a goal, something that we are supposed to birth in our time here on earth. Yeah. One of my favorite sayings is that a man must give birth to an immortal thing that will keep on living even after he's gone. So I think in our quest to build a legacy, we can often see ourselves kind of compromising on things that God has a very clear line that we shouldn't compromise on. Yeah. And we try to find a way to modify it to fit what we're trying to build. And even when it comes to like beauty, so now let's kind of shift the conversation to beauty. One of the things that I've learned over the years is like you talked about, not everything that sounds good is sound or good. Many times we have so many voices speaking to us of how we should think of ourselves. Like I always make a joke, right? Like fat people want to be skinny, skinny people want to be fat, tall people want to be short, short people want to be tall. People that have hair don't want hair, people that don't have hair want hair. It's like there's this insatiable desire that man has, and oftentimes society and culture feeds and kind of feed and pours fuel on that light, on that fire, and before we know it, we will go from being this, confident person in Christ, and now we're beginning to doubt our own nature. And what I've also learned, which is why I think this conversation is important, is how we see ourselves matter more than how God sees us, right? And I'm going to explain that, right? Because if God sees you as a winner and you see yourself as a loser, it doesn't really matter how God sees you, right? Because how you see yourself is going to drive every decision you make, right? Our habits are built from our identity. Yeah. Our decisions are built. We make decisions from who we think we are, right? What we tolerate is based on who we think we are. So many times the problem that we experience in the area of relationship is a reflection of how we really see ourselves. And God, the Bible, the scriptures tell us that, like when David describes how God made him, he says, he made me beautifully and wonderfully. So like David is acknowledging, hey, look, God did not make mistakes when he made me. I'm beautiful. I'm wonderfully created. I'm perfectly designed for what my assignment is. So in your opinion, right, especially being that you're Christian, how have you seen what society's standard for beauty is infiltrating the church, and how we are seeing church people go from being confident daughters and sons and daughters of God to being these people that are trying to chase an image that Solomon tells us that we can never, reach?
Yeah, that's huge because, especially in this generation, you're dealing with a lot of people where what they're chasing is what everyone else is chasing. So it's like, okay, then I have to look like that. I have to sound like that. I have to be like that. And I think there's that thin line between those who want to follow God or walk in the ways of Christ, that you then have to check yourself and also see, okay, what are things that make me feel good about myself, where now they find their worth in the material things, or they find their worth in who got the best bag, who got their hair done, got their nails done, And so I think it's when you have it in the right category where you want to take care of yourself. I believe what the world would see it as is like, oh, self-care. They took that and they like ran with it. So people who want to do and work for God, they say, oh, self-care, so I have to do this, and this, and that'll be considered as self-care. And in all truth, it's creating an identity of you that is now warping you in how you are able to hear compliments, how you're able to look at yourself and say, I'm worth it, or even your levels of doubt, your levels of fear, your anxiety is all rooted in the worth that you see within yourself, that God already promised it to you. So once that one thread, and this is where, society, which makes it even harder, because in schools today, my little sister, she be coming home with the darnest things. I'm like, Lord Jesus. Because I'm like, it was tough when I was in high school. So I can't imagine, how much more is being spoken to make a person feel like this is what you need to look like to be cool. And if you're not, guess what we gonna do to you? Or guess how we're gonna start joking now and make it feel, or joke around as a joke, right? But what I'm saying is really to make you feel less. And so you have to keep a stance, you have to keep a posture, you have to look a certain way. So I think it is very, very hard for the person who has not yet found their worth beyond the looks, beyond that. And the best thing for that is, really being okay with the process too, that if you've already been living that lifestyle, to give that hope. All right, but I have been caring more about, and being real with yourself, I have been caring more about what I look like. I have been caring more about, what my friends have to say, because when they tell me, girl, why you look like that today, I care, and it inserts a seed, like you were saying earlier. It drops that seed in you that then causes you to have to prove yourself, to prove that, you have to look, or you're working to be this, but it's not really what they see, because internally you're doing it to show them, right? So the biggest part on that, when it comes to like refinding or realigning yourself once you lose it, because I think at some point each and every person has gone through it, including myself, that need to prove something, and so to realign that is one first. I always say it like this, like I deal with the youth at my church, and so I tell them, I'm like, okay, bet. So once we put something on the table, we're gonna look at it real quick. We're gonna look at it. We're gonna accept. We're gonna take it. That's how it is. Accept it. Now that it's in front of you, now you realize, all right, bet I have trauma in this area. That's why I have to prove myself. I'm dealing with high levels of anxiety. It's rooted somewhere, or I feel like I have to look good for this person, or this guy got me doing things that I don't normally do, or the list goes on, right? We put it on top of the table. Can we be transparent, right? Let's talk about it. Let's break it down. Now that we have it in front of us, we accepted it. Now let's dissect it. Where's the root to that? Where did it come from? Where did it start? Because if we don't get to the root, then it's all the residue of why you're like that is just gonna, you can be aware of it. And this is something that God has been pressing on me lately, is you can know a truth. You can know a truth, understand a truth, and not live a truth. So therefore, come on. So therefore, the fruit of that truth is not evident in your life. One thing I always say and I'm going to go back to that part right there, but one thing I always say as a way to find yourself and grounded is, or to give a relief to yourself in walking with God, is that at the end of the day, truth cannot, or the fruit cannot be faked. You cannot fake the fruit of God. And that brings peace. And it also brings an urgency. It brings urgency because they're like, dang, so a person who's really following God, they gonna know. They gonna know what's up. And then also to say, all right, the fruit of God cannot be fixed, so therefore I'm gonna see it. Right? It brings peace when you see chaos in this world. But going back to that part of accepting it, dissecting it, once we dissect, you're going to see some ugly things. You're going to see some things that you don't necessarily want to accept about yourself. You're going to have to, you're going to look at some things and be like, is that really me? And you don't want to say it is because it's ugly, right? So you're dissecting it, you're looking, it gets deeper and deeper. Is like an onion. I always say you're pulling back, and you're letting Holy Spirit and God allow those help you do that. Not the person to do that, but someone to who is being used by God to help you do that. So you're dissecting, and now the next step, accept it again. Now you accepted it again, so that now that gives you the opportunity to heal from what it is that you just saw. So it's accept, dissect, accept it again, and heal from what you've seen. And that healing process, I think, is the hardest part for us as humans, because of the fact that that feeling doesn't always feel good. God will put us in situations over and over and over and over again, so that we have the opportunity at endurance to endure, and to also learn and apply it until because he knows whether or not we really understand, even if we say we do. So to then go through that healing process is, I think, the biggest part, because then it allows you to take those same principles, and as we grow as humans, apply it again elsewhere and everything that presents itself as a challenge.
You just dropped a whole, a lot of good stuff right there, which I want us to eventually kind of unwrap some of the things that you talked about, because I do think some of them it can shed some light in some dark places for people. When you talked about the fruits, when you talked about going back to the root, one of the things that I've always learned, is that having self-reflection matters, right? So if you tend to attract a certain type of man, right? Going back to say, okay, what am I doing to always attract this type of man matters. If you tend to feel like less than in certain particular situations, going back to understand why matters, right? But what I really wanted us to focus and kind of touch on a little bit is this, right? What are some of the, obviously you worked with some of these young women or young men in the youth. what are some of the reasons, what are some of those, like, I know one, like daddy issues, right? So like, what are some of the things that you've seen that drive someone to feel less than? What are some of those traumatic or situations that make someone go from feeling like I'm God's beautiful creation to feeling like, man, like nobody wants me, or I'm not good enough, or I don't deserve good enough? What are some of the things that you've seen that drive that behavior?
Yeah, I've seen a few things. There's like a plethora of things that can cause a person to feel less than, especially now. I feel like it's more likely now because of the standard that society would make. But rejection, people have a huge issue with rejection. Being rejected by somebody then puts that immediate wall up, like, I'm gonna reject you before you reject me, so therefore I'm not even gonna give you a chance. Or I'm gonna look like something.
Real quick, before you even drop some more nuggets, right? Rejection, I think, is a big thing. I think for both, and this conversation, I know it's beauty, right? But it's, for men, it's handsome, right? But it goes both ways, right? Why do you think we have so much problem with rejection? Why do you think that drives why do you think it drives us to such a psychological place where we begin to think less of ourselves?
Yeah, that's good. So the rejection can root from like multiple places, I feel. Whether it's something that you've dealt with first in your family, if you've been rejected from your father, if you've been rejected from your mother, however, or even siblings, because sometimes siblings be planting some seeds, right? Then there's that side of it, and then you're also dealing with what you went through moment-wise in your walk, like, from in school, how you dealt with levels of rejection, whether people treated you bad, whether you got bullied in school, whether you've been said, certain things have been said to you, like, that stuck with you for the rest of your life, that then caused you to have that wall. It's being more specific than it's how you even dealt with certain scenarios within yourself. Like, let's say you have a facial issue, or you're dealing with something specific, your insecurities, right? Let's say you're talking about your insecurities, and those are the things that are now more sensitive than others. Some people don't care about certain things, right? And then for others, it's like, okay, so that gets commented on a lot more often than not. So now you have high levels of rejection because of the fact that it's like you feel like you have to put that wall up. I feel like it goes really deep, honestly. It goes deep because of how everyone is different. And so the way that they receive things causes them to have to, like, deal with those trigger points, all those different forms of trigger points. So I think it goes down, the final way of looking at it is what triggers the person can lead to why they have such high levels of rejection. And how to heal those areas is that forgiveness part of it could be for, how to forgive the person who treated you bad without them saying sorry to you,
I think forgiveness is such a, especially in the church setting.
Yeah.
Like, I know sometimes it's because people think because they are Christians that they forgive easily. That is one of the biggest misconceptions, right? And I think forgiveness is such a big deal that in our Lord's Prayer, it says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those that trespass against us. And one of the things that I've learned that I think one of the most misunderstood concept about forgiveness is forgiveness does not mean that you have to be reconciled with the person, right? And forgiveness doesn't mean that you have to form a relationship with the person, right? Forgiveness is more of just letting go of the hurt that they have inflicted on you and saying that you don't have the power to affect how I show up moving forward. Yeah. Because sometimes, like, one of my favorite definition of unforgiveness is drinking poison and expecting someone else to die, right? So you're drinking the poison and it's killing you, but you are hoping that person is being affected by the fact that you didn't forgive them. Right. But forgiveness is more about you, like me. It's more about me than the person. He's saying, I'm not going to let you affect how I show up. I'm not going to let you affect. It's like, for example, it's like a guy that gets rejected by a woman and then never wants to talk to any woman again. Now, you're letting her affect how you show up with every other woman that you encounter. Or even sometimes, like you talked about, one of the biggest things we see is, like, if someone is rejected by their parents, like we talk about, like, the whole, if you ever study the stats or the statistics on daddy issues, right? So many times, if you go to therapy, one of the things they will tell you is to forgive your dad, right? Like, just forgiving the person. Maybe the person didn't know better. Maybe the person just didn't have the skill set to give you what you wanted in that time. I think when you talk about just like forgiving, I think people need to kind of know what forgiveness is. It's not saying, hey, you got to go back and be best friends with the person. Yeah, no, that's not what it means. It's saying, hey, look, just don't give that person power, because the person that really truly have power over your life is you and God, right? Yeah. God works through you, and the level that you let God work is the level that He's going to work. Your faith and your level of, kind of vulnerability with God allows Him to work. Yeah. So I just wanted to touch on that.
No, yeah, that's deep. That's deep. I think that you said the vulnerability. I feel like sometimes we get confused with why we have to say things out loud to God. God knows everything, so I don't have to say. I think a lot of times is that we say it out loud because of the fact that we need to understand that that's a necessity in our walk. Mm-hmm. And you touched it, like the forgiveness part is like, we don't realize that we're holding ourselves back in not forgiving the person. And some things, it's very hard for a person to swallow that pill because of how they see it. When you have unforgiveness, it blinds you. It's like when you're in a dark place, that's what then causes you to not see what can get you out of that dark place. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's the hardest part. You end up lying to yourself. You become in denial to what's needed because you've created this comfort zone for yourself to not forgive or to not want to deal with it. Throwing it under the rug is easier than actually dealing with it. And so however many times you're able to not do that, then builds that muscle. I say is like a spiritual muscle. The more you work that out, the stronger you get in it, the less likely it's going to happen to you. And if we can understand that part, then it's like, okay, but even if I am blinded by the scenario in the moment, if I apply that, I will then eventually see what it is God needs me to see in this situation. Because I want it to be not exposed in a negative way, not judged, because you have the two way of looking at it. Because people say like, I don't want my situation getting exposed because they're gonna judge me. They're gonna treat me bad. And God doesn't expose to make you go through let's just say negativity, right? He doesn't do it for that purpose. He does it for the sake of you growing. And that exposure, He won't do it where it's, I'm going to put you in the spot and you have to deal with it. Now, it does make you uncomfortable, the exposure that He presents. It makes you feel a level of discomfort, but He then provides you the result or a solution to what He then exposes. And so now you can take that and then apply it however many times you desire so you can gain that strength in that area. But yeah.
Right, just to add to that, I think also when it comes to rejection, I think the way we define things matter, right? People always hear me say that. For example, I think, like I would meet someone, for example, and they'll be like, "Oh, I love you." I'm like, "You done?" All right? Because I feel like the way you define things affect how you behave within them, right? So, for example, like the concept of love, like when someone tells me they love me and the actions doesn't reflect it, is like, for me, it's like you're BSing and I can't take you serious. Because I think love, again, going back to the scriptures, it's the foundation of truth. Love is seeing the value of something and having the proper response to it. So the way we know someone loves something is how they respond to its value. Right? So, for example, go back to the scriptures. How do we know God loves us? It's not because of what He said. It's not because of what He said He will do. It's because of what He did. He said, hey, for God so loved the world that He gave His Son. Right? So He gave what was so His most prized possession was what He gave in exchange for us. So when someone says they love you and their actions doesn't reflect it, that is not love, right? That is just telling you what they want you to hear, right? So going back to the word, the rejection thing, I think sometimes redefining things matters. So, for example, instead of seeing a certain season or a certain scenario as rejection, seeing it as redirection, right? This is not the path that God wanted me to take. If they rejected me, it doesn't speak of my value. It speaks of God's divine providence, right? Providence is the ability to see before, right? God have seen before and know where you're supposed to go and say, hey, this is not the path. He allowed the rejection to happen, right? God doesn't do evil, but He can allow evil to occur, right? So seeing rejection as redirection can help you change how you look at rejection. So let's say, for example, you go to a job and they reject you. It doesn't mean that you're not good enough. It just means, hey, this is not where you need to be. Go and find somewhere that they see your value, right? And also, one of my ways of seeing rejection that kind of helps me deal with rejection is seeing it as protection. So, like a good friend of mine, Ezekiel, when I did a podcast with him, he said, hey, when God gives, it's God's goodness. When God withholds, it's God's wisdom. So what I've come to learn is, instead of seeing rejection as, man, like I didn't deserve it, or I'm not good enough, I now see it as, man, God, in God's divine wisdom, he has withhold because he's protecting me from something that I might not see because of my own limited view as human. So, and I know we're having this conversation for those of us that are listening. It's like, oh, how does this have to do with beauty? Because again, how you see yourself, like you talked about, that is the fruit, right? How you see yourself is the fruit. That's what everybody looks at. But how you really see yourself comes from a deeper root. And sometimes the fact that you don't see yourself as God sees you is maybe because you were rejected. Like one of my favorite stories on that is, we look at a man like Steve Jobs. I remember reading his book because I love to read like about very successful people because I want to see how they think. Like even like I was hanging out with like Sinach, right? And all I could literally was watching how she think. Like for example, like I noticed with Sinach, the first thing she does when she walks into a room is she listens to the music. And it's crazy that even when she hears some gospel music, she asks for you to change it. Like if you play a gospel music that she feels is not in alignment with God's truth, she will ask you to change it because, like for me, what I picked up from there is like, wow, she doesn't want anything to contaminate her truth. Right? Like those little things. So reading Steve Jobs' book, like this is a man that had like what most of us would want to have. Like when we talk about having success at a young age, having money, having access to things, government and whatnot. And he fought, like, if you read his book, you could see that he really struggled with his sense of identity because why? His father and his mom didn't want him when he was born. Mm-hmm. So they gave him up. So he spent most of his life trying to figure out why. Why did they reject? This is a man that I've had. Think about how much success he had. Like, I remember like the year they released the book, I think an article came out that Apple had like $1 trillion in cash reserves. This man had more money in cash than most governments, most countries. And he was feeling so insecure, which I always, again, something sensitive. I always say sometimes I look at, like, if you read his book, right? So he begins to search for his identity and he begins to travel to all of these different parts of the country, trying to find some way where he could find like meaning that makes sense to him. And then he subscribed to a religion that allowed him that required him not to eat certain things, wear certain things. Like if you read the book, they would say he showed up to meetings without deodorant on, stinking up the whole place because he read something that said, hey, you shouldn't do this, right? So he was just trying to find where he belonged, right? Even to the point that when he was diagnosed with cancer, he wouldn't take some of the prescription that was given to him because his religion didn't permit him to, right? Which he ended up taking later on. So like that's what I'm saying. Many times what we see is the outside, right. But if we go back and find out why do I feel like this, we can trace it back to the root of maybe it's a rejection that happened. Like for some people is their father not being around, right? Like I'm not sure if you have ever dealt with people that have daddy issues, but there's this sense of abandonment that they have where they either become very clingy or they become very detached, right? So I think when we talk about beauty is not just, hey, like I think I'm beautiful. If you think you're beautiful, why are you making the decisions you're making? Yeah. If you think you're beautiful, why are you tolerating something that you wouldn't advise someone else to tolerate? Right? So going back to what drives that decision is what I'm realizing that you're talking about, like kind of peeling the onion and kind of getting to the root of the problem. So when you get to the root, what are some of the ways that you will advise people to go through that healing process?
Depending on what we find when we get there.
Give me an example.
Well, you got, let's say you got someone who, and it's something very surface in a way, but it's something that's common, compliments. right? You deal with people who are fed off of compliments, or they find their worth through compliments, or it's like, if I don't get told today that I look good, we're going to have some problems internally, you know? And so it's, in that is how you look at yourself, because that's why you desire that, because it's what's fueling you to feel better about yourself. And then when you feel better, then you can live about your day in a happy mood. Sometimes you end up getting home, and you get at home and you're just like, I don't want to do life anymore because so-and-so didn't tell me that I look like this today and I dressed nice, you know? And so it's just those, the levels that you put within yourself to expect so you can feel better about yourself. But, and when we find the root of what it is, it's really being able to, like, you know, see how could we stop doing that pattern that leads us back there every time, right? Let's say if we're talking about someone who's in a toxic situation, a relationship, let's say, and what's getting them to get back into that place is because of the comfort they feel with that person, or they feel safe, right? And they're letting themselves, like you just finished saying, get treated like they're less than because of the fact that they have all those other things with that person. And so it's like, okay, so how could we get to the place of finding what is getting you back into that pattern over and over again? Now that we picked up on that, now that we see, all right, bet you're doing this when you're doing this, da-da-da, because, you know, it could be a variety of things. Like it could really, the list can go on. But once you track it down, then to catch it, you know, if you're going to have someone, this is why I always say it's always important to have someone hold you accountable. If not, then you're going to just keep doing it, especially because you can, especially because it's actually easy. So once you identify it, you make it public. I have an issue with this, and this. Let's say it's like I'm addicted, or like I lean on drugs, right? I lean towards smoking weed because it makes me see how it's like I use it now as a form of a crutch that then doesn't allow me to do this, and this because of the placement that it has, especially because of the placement that it has. So it's like, all right, how could we now be real with ourselves? Where it's not like, you know, you think of a person, and I use this analogy only because of the fact that I just said drugs, but you think about a coke addict, right? A lot of times, and I say this with no offense to anyone, any church, but we have some churches that they'll be like, all right, this coke addict's gonna come. She's been free off of coke for a whole week. Come up and give your testimony because you're never gonna do this again. What makes you think that coke addict still isn't a coke addict? You're giving her false a false hope, false healing, false identity, false all of that, right? And how quickly she can be healed from this sickness that she's dealing with, or he's dealing with. And so now it places you in a place where now you have to overcome something more. But so to say that is like to be real with yourself about the process that you're gonna have to go through. And I think that's something that even for myself, like your girl done been through it and back. I feel I'm mad young, but I'm like, Lord done challenged me in ways that I'm like, okay, let me make sure I write down these principles and remember them. Because if I forget, that's where I feel like the enemy likes to have lots of fun, is if you forget the thing that got you out of the situation the first time, you're going to do it again, and probably it's going to be worse for you. Because once you're free from it, what happens? It comes back times 10, right? So to know that is like, okay, let me make sure I remember these principles. So like you asked the question, once we identify what it is that has become a habit, or has become something that's repetitive, or something that you feel is the hardest thing for you to let go of, be vocal about it, right? Speak about it, so then you can find yourself and speak about it to the person who is who got entrusted, and you'll know the difference. You got people who will look at you, why are you still doing that? You know, who will make you feel like, then I'm never gonna tell you again. Like I am not coming to you next time, right? So it's like, okay, be mindful with who God aligned in your lives. Tell them about it, and then have peace and patience with yourself, and let God bring you the peace that if you do mess up again, or when you do mess up again, that you're able to say, I'm gonna use that, and I use this for myself as well. I'm gonna use everything that that brings me that discomfort in my heart as an alarm to not do it again, instead of using that mess up to make me feel less. There's a very big difference in doing that, and I feel like that can help a lot of people, because it is such a diminishing feeling. You start to self-destruct when you let that become the priority of who you are, when you allow your mistakes to be what defines you, right? But taking it instead and using it as the alarm to remind you to boost you up, to give you that that fuel. All right, bet. I remember that feeling and how terrible that felt, how exhausted I was, how tired I was, how blinded I was. And that's a place I never want to go to again. So let me use that as a way to remind me how to not do it again. And there you then, once you start applying these things, as I say, everyone's process is different. Once you start applying it, and when you start applying it, it gives you the opportunity to then gain strength. All right, bet now I'm stronger. Now it presented itself again, and I didn't fail this time. All right, speak about it. Give yourself that. And if you're that person who likes to lie, then don't do that. Yeah, so this is why know thyself, really know where you're at. Mm-hmm. If you like to be the person to say, I'm going to tell you because I want to be boasted up. I told you I did it, hey, Mm-hmm. And it's not you really self-reflecting. It's you just wanting that to confirm in the back of your head, I did it this many times, but I missed it that one time. However the case is, with whatever it is, you feel me? Mm-hmm. So yeah, to finalize that is just being okay with messing up, and also in the midst of that, in your process of recovering from whatever it is, right? You could have so many plethora of things that you could be battling, right? Being real with that battle, speak about it, and once you're going through that process of stop not doing it anymore, to build yourself and be patient. Be patient, have peace, the peace of God. Everything that God provides is something that can't be faked. You can't fake his love. You cannot fake his peace, Lord knows, right? If you know, you know. If you done been through some things and you're like, Lord, give me some peace, you know the difference of having to fake it and be like, I'm fine, right? That happens a lot in the church. I'm okay, how are you? Good, God is good, right?
Blessed and highly favored.
Blessed and highly favored, right? And for dang sure, you over here depressed in your room by yourself, and it's like, let's be real. And dealing with that area and letting him allow you to self-reflect. Help me self-reflect, Lord, so I can work on what you need me to work on, so I can be who you called me to be, not who I called me to be.
Nice. I love that. Clap up. Before we end this episode, I think there's one aspect that I think drives the whole beauty standard, which is social media, and obviously comparing ourselves. And there is, like I always say, but comparison is such a horrible thing, because every race that God assigns man to, he provides grace, right? And when you begin to run a race that you weren't assigned to, you don't have the grace for it. So when there's no grace, it means there's disgrace, right? And many times we feel that shame, we feel that guilt, we feel that need to compete, because once you start comparing, the only thing that comes after comparing is competing, right? Once I compare, I gotta compete, right? Yeah. So I think that one of the things that we have seen that is driving a huge level, like Simon Sinek is a big leadership writer, and in his book, he said this generation would suffer the most low self-esteem because of social media and how easily accessible people are to everybody else in the world. And we know social media people typically post their best. Now, so they're posting their best, and you're comparing your reality to their best version of whatever they created, to show you. So I think many times what we have seen with people with beauty and how they feel about themselves is what they are seeing on social media, what they are seeing on the TV, what they are seeing on shows. So, like, what is your take on that? And what are some of the advice that you will give people who are struck? Because some of them might not know, but they're naturally comparing without even knowing it. Like they're scrolling, and while they're scrolling, they're comparing their life to the life. And it's not just in terms of looks. This is just your whole existence. Whether it's your peace, your joy, you're just comparing. And before you know it, now you feel less than because of what you saw somebody else enjoying.
Yeah. I feel like those who are called, especially to have a platform, I say called because not everybody's supposed to be put in front, and you end up learning either the hard way, right? If it isn't for you, whether it's years from that time that you start, but for the person who's constantly comparing, which I think happens to a lot of us, even for myself, I have to make sure I'm constantly reflecting on, what I'm looking at, paying attention to what I'm intaking. Now, I say that because what you scroll on, this is a social media society right now. Like everything's social media, which we can use in a good way and a bad way. And so what you're scrolling through could either, well, not that either, because it's going to be inevitable. It will compromise your thoughts, whether you like it or not. And this is why I think it's really important that you identify first, like even if it makes you feel good, you like this person, they're cool, but yet they still promote that need to compete. Because you could tell when a person is competitive. You could tell that, you know, their ego, their pride stands out louder, and they have to like show themselves. And you know, they're usually the ones who. So for those people who are going through those battles, right? So when you're scrolling, to pay attention to what you're looking at that would lead you to want to have that competitive mindset in the first place. And, you know, really be real with yourself, what you're looking at, and paying attention to what causes you to feel good inside. You know, what makes you feel better about certain things that probably shouldn't have that root in you, or that like thread in your life. So paying attention to those things, and I exaggerate what you scroll through, because that's what we're doing a lot of the time. And sometimes it's like, ooh, this looks good, this looks good, this looks good. And instead of being joyful for the person, you become envious of the person because you want what they have, and not in the good way. Right? It can go two ways. You can say, I want what you have, and be like, yo, I genuinely desire what God is giving you. Like, that's crazy. How did you do it? Like, what did you do? Obedience. What did you obey? Like, what did you listen to? You know? So it's like, you start to look at it like that, in that area where it questions your there's two ways. Cause I don't want to say character. Character is who you are, your, personality. Because I think there's a difference. So it questions your personality, see where that rooted from in the first place. And to be real, when you are being competitive. So like you're looking through, you're scrolling through, you see this, and this. It's okay to see things and say, I want that, but check your heart when you're saying it. Because it could be, I want that. And it could be, I want that. You know, there's two different ways of doing it. And so when we project, which each and every one of us do, you can catch yourself in your projections. So if you see that, and for myself as well, it's happened to me time and time again where I'm like, let me make sure I'm not that person. Oh my God. Cause it don't look good. It does not look good. And it's like, okay, to identify that is based off of when it presents itself. So if I'm doing something, again, I pay attention. I unfollow a lot of things because I realize, okay, this is not planting a good seed. And I found the root of why I'm starting to look at things a certain way. So I unfollow certain things. Change my feed. Change your feed, please. If you want to edify yourself and you want your soul and your spirit to be healthy, it does matter what you look at. I know it gets watered down a lot, and I feel like watering that down then gives the leeway for you to get manipulated. And to be manipulated doesn't necessarily mean I willingly said, hey, I want to be manipulated. It means that you put yourself in a predicament that then allow these things, and it's easier said than done. But once you take that action, you'll see the difference. You view things different. You take things different. You don't feel as a need to like have to make yourself accommodate to others because of the fact of what you see to look like, you know. Just to end with this part, I feel like an example of like when you are aware of yourself and you start to see things, and you like are told, like, you know how you said shame and guilt start to overwhelm you sometimes, which is a very, very real thing, where it overwhelms you to the point where you don't want to move. You don't want to take heed to nothing because of how thick it feels. And it's a real feeling. I feel like sometimes it gets dismissed. Like, don't feel the shame. Don't feel the guilt. It's okay to feel it, but how long you stay in it does matter. You know, and that's where you can start saying, all right, this worry should not be there for that long. So that means there's something we need to pay attention to. But once that gets presented to you, I think of Peter, right? When Jesus told him, and this is how I viewed it, when Jesus told him that you're going to deny me 3 times, what did Peter do? Peter ran away. My man ran. He started crying in the corner, you know, and so instead of running to the source who can fix him, he ran away from the source. Therefore, then you see timeline, you go down the timeline, later on he ends up doing this, which I feel God utilized that for his glory, for the person who has done such a shameful thing. I think that's the worst thing you could do. Bump everything we've ever felt. The amounts of shame that we've ever felt, think about that, right, in the forefront of your mind. And times 100 is what Peter felt. Because to deny God, I think, is the worst thing you could do with a genuine belief of who he is, right? Because if he doesn't have much truth in you, then you're probably going to just be like, whatever. But, you know, that was a big root. So I say that instead of running to God, we run away from him in moments of shame and guilt. And so you don't give him the opportunity to mold your heart in that moment so that you don't end up having to deal with the collateral damage that Peter ended up having to deal with, which God used. You know, he ended up being an apostle for many. Thank God for Peter, right? But I don't think he had to go through what he went through in denying him, because if he went to God to deal with that area that would have even allowed him to deny him in the first place, then we would have had a different story. We learn from both stories, but let's also think about what we can apply for ourselves. How can I make sure that I don't run away in a moment of shame and guilt because it feels terrible, right? And it does feel terrible. But make sure I run to the source who can align me back to truth, because that's what I genuinely, our hearts genuinely desire, you know? So, yes.
No, that is really good. That's really good. You've shared a lot of great point tonight. And I really hope that when people listen to it, that they let God work on your heart, right? Yeah. One of the things that you said that I think we should start paying attention to is pay attention to what affects you. Pay attention to what triggers you. It says a lot more than you realize, right? What is that? What you allowing have an emotional impact on you says a lot about where you are in your walk with God and how you feel about yourself and how you see yourself. And I think, when we feel beautiful, we feel like I am enough. And when you feel I'm enough, it shouldn't come from, how much money you have. It shouldn't come from what the physical attributes are. It shouldn't come from your socio-economic status. It shouldn't come from anything from the outside. It should come from the truth, which is God's word. You are enough, not because of any standard that man created. You are enough because God said you are enough. And that is all that you really need to feel enough. And when you stop feeling enough because of something outside of that, that's when you're now. So the Bible says, let all men be liars and let God be true, right? So it's like, if you believe in what someone else or what a situation or what anything else said about you, more than you believe what God said about you, then you're calling God a liar and calling them God, right? The truth. So give us your last word. Last word on beauty. Something to help someone that maybe right now doesn't feel beautiful. Maybe right now, struggling in that area because, like you said, sometimes church folks, we are highly and, we are blessed and highly favored, but we are struggling on the inside because many times we don't want to look like we don't have faith if we express our heart of anxiety or that we feel less. That's like when you tell a church person, I'm depressed, it's like, man, you don't have faith. It's like there's this sense of if you're struggling, then you don't know God. Yeah. But I always tell people, you look at the scriptures, like they all struggled. They all struggled. And like you said, one thing that I've learned, even when it comes to sin, is that many times when we sin, it is our proclivity to run away from God. Yeah. It's like, man, he doesn't want me. Man, he can't love me based on how I've acted. But the reality is, if you're sick, you should be going to a doctor, not running away from the doctor. And when you sin, the right place to go to is not going back to the ward that broke you, but going back to the person that can fix you. Yeah. So I think you've made a lot of important points, but give us one last word on beauty and how you, some advice you can give someone.
Yeah, I think we touched on a lot of the parts of like where it can be rooted from, why you look at yourself the way that you do, but to remember that you are enough, that, God called you each and every, there is no coincidences in God. It's not like, oh, I just made it. I made the cut, right? He called you with a purpose. He called you to find your purpose, right? In this walk with him, to feel secure in him and to know that when you call on him is never in vain. I think a lot of times we feel like our prayers go because they're unanswered, right? Mm-hmm. Because our timeline isn't God's timeline. I think that's a huge one where we ask for something because we don't see it the next day. We're like, I'm not going to ask for it again. I'm not going to pray anymore because I don't see it working. But to know that within his timeline, if you believe and in your heart, you really let it sit in you, like, God does not allow anything that I say, every tear that I've cried, every call that I've made to go in vain, then that will give me hope to do it again, because I know at some point, if it's not tomorrow, if I don't even see it happening in my day-to-day, let's say I'm praying about something in my family and I don't see it working out, I'm going to keep trying because I understand that my try is not in vain. And every time I try, it's going to be worth it for later, because then it becomes something. It's like, you think about it. It's like watering a plant. You put the seed in. A lot of times we like to just put the fake version of the plant and say, I have a flower, and that's an example I actually used recently with one of the youth. And it really stood out because it starts to really allow you to see, like, have I been putting a version of a flower that I am because I want it to look like this? Or can I water it? Can I water the seed that got planted, remove the ones that shouldn't be there, water the ones that should be there, and allow to see myself in that process of getting that amount of sunlight, getting that amount of time, and knowing that every time, like, if you don't water the seed, you're going to end up drying out, So to know every single time I water, every single time I pray, every single time I worship, every time I say, you know what, God, I'm going to give you a chance to show yourself. He sees that. He sees the posture of your heart. He sees that you're, to shift your heart postures, to be more intentional. Will allow you to look at the next person and see their heart as well, which then allows you to, this is why we need each other. We need to remind each other, get a group of people that God is working in, and grow with them, and know to encourage each other, plant seeds into each other. You got this. You're going to be this. You're going to be successful spiritually, physically, emotionally, in all the areas that you could have been struggling in. God is going to grow you in that. Speak into each other's lives, and you'll start to see, as I gain those group, as I start to let go of people. I feel like a lot of times we have a hard time letting go of people. And even for myself, because you care. We care, we love, as much as we like to say, they did me dirty, you still care, and it'd be more of a damage on you to say you don't care, because then it causes that wall that you put up towards everyone that you meet, and that becomes a root in you that gets projected. Sadly, I've been there too. But to get the people around you to speak into your life, and to speak into their lives, and to also believe it. I think that's a big part. If you don't believe it, it's going to be known, and you're going to deal with that suffering that comes with not believing. And it sucks. It's a very tough place because you want to believe. I think no one in this world wants to go through suffering. No one in this world wants to go through high levels of depression, anxiety, lack of faith, lack of trusting. Trust issues come from the things that we deal with in life, which I'm still learning from that, right? But because of that awareness, then causes you to then see where God can be in that area as well. But being real with what gets presented to you, being real with what you see within yourself, shift your heart posture, allow your heart to be told something, like be okay with taking correction. That was also a part that I had an issue with as well, dealing with correction and being okay with it for the sake of my well-being, that they have my best interest, and to believe that. So once I believe everything that gets said, now I can actually feel confident. Now I feel the confidence. Now I'm confident in everything that I do. Now I realize that, wow, his love, his vision, the wisdom that gets applied from others that I surround myself with, the discernment that he starts to build within you with time is actually worth it more than anything that you could have ever imagined. And it's a beauty that comes from within that then exudes outside of you. This is why it's not about your appearance. I could care less, and I say this, I could care less what a man looks like. If you start talking and what you say is dusty, I'm gonna just leave it like that. Sweetheart, try again on somebody stupid. You know what I'm saying? No, to be real, and it's really what comes out of your heart that then projects outside of you. And you could be, maybe you do look a little, maybe you got some stuff, wrong physically, but you still look beautiful because of your heart. And that's what God does. And it's a beautiful thing to really have that foundation that when you take that next step, and I'm going to end here. I'm going to stop talking. I promise. You think of a finish line, right? You think of a race and you have that person who's running through the race. And while they're running, they start slowing down because they think that the next step they're going to make is going to fall. They're going to fall. You think about it like this, right? And so what God does is on that way to your finish line, he's like, the next step you're going to make, you're going to be confident in that because of what you stand on. So now you're no longer taking baby steps. You're going to, is it going to break? Okay, now I'm going to go. You're delaying yourself, and God will still use your delay. He'll use your delay for the glory of himself. But why would you want to sit here and say, let me delay myself, right? So, in instead of having to check if whether or not what you're going to step on is going to be solid, God creates a foundation, not just saying, I'm going to stand on a firm foundation, because we say that, I stand on the solid rock, right? But we actually are able to live a lifestyle that represents the foundation we stand on. So therefore, we went from testing the ground to sprinting to the finish line, because we are now confident in the moves that we're making. And that's something that we want to have, to have that confidence, to have that boldness. So yes.
Thank you. You've been awesome tonight. You've been awesome tonight. And my last advice for people is, whatever you repeatedly hear, you will likely start to believe, right? When Paul writes to the church in Philippi, in Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, he says, hey, fix your thoughts on this things, right? Like, you are in control of your mind, right? And part of how, like, even when we talk about Solomon, when Solomon left one advice for his son, which was, he said, hey, above all else, guard your heart, right? Because whatever comes in will eventually come out. So I think as we try to walk in the truth of God's word, we must keep ingesting truth. Like the Bible says, fix your mind on things that are true. Like if you read that scripture, it says, fix your mind on things that are true. Fix your mind on things that are noble. Fix your mind on things that are excellent, right? So making a conscious effort to take in truth matters. It matters. It matters in more ways than you realize, because the world is feeding you lies. If you don't make that conscious effort to take in truth, based on the kind of music you listen to, the kind of podcasts you listen to, the kind of TV shows you watch, the kind of friends you keep, what you are ingesting and what you allow your mind to be fixed on will eventually affect how you feel about yourself, and it will affect the decision you made. This has been wonderful, Marie, right? Marie. Great. All right.
Imagine I tell you my full name, Maria Elise.
Okay, we're not going to try that. But anyways, thank you so much for all the wisdom that you've shared today. And thank you for coming. I know you came from very far. This has been wonderful. Again, if you guys are not subscribed, subscribe to the YouTube channel, Relationship Essentials. The episodes drop every other Friday. And once a month, we come together. We come here, we record the episodes. You get to ask questions. We get to play games. We get to have fun. But most importantly, what we want to do here is to push Kingdom's way of doing relationship. We don't want you to do it your way. We know your way doesn't work. If you don't know that yet, eventually you'll realize that it doesn't work. God's way is better. It has been proven. It's been tried, and it's true. God bless you guys for coming out. Thank you for listening. I will see you guys next time. God bless.